This is Andy,
And this is Matt,
and you're listening to
the Hop Podcast with no name.
What a dumb name.
It's so stupid. Episode 77. And we're definitely only a couple days late in recording it, which isn't bad. First, to get it out of the way, I am going through some allergies. So if you, listener and or Andrea, hear any what sounds like deeper sighing when you're talking, it's not because of what you're saying.
Wait a minute. That you can't promise that ahead of time.
Oh no, I'll make it very obvious when it is about what you're saying. It just, for the most part,
promise that.
won't be because of what you're saying.
Oh man.
But we did last episode wrap up our complexity discussion.
Good for us. We did. Finally, we made it.
A whole lot of operational learning about your morning and the big five and the different ways you and your husband approach getting the children ready in the morning, which is always fun for me to hear as someone who has gotten your children ready in the morning. And I kind of know the process a little bit. So that was fun. But we're moving on. Greener pastures.
Yes. Our goal in this series of mini series group of mini series.
That was a big sigh. Just
is to touch on some of the elements of what makes hop, one of which was complexity science. And now we're going to move on to organizational psychology. So our hope is to be able to... Can I just
jump in? Because I love the idea that you just said, what makes hop? And then the immediate thought would be, oh, it's the 5 principles. And we're like, we're not going to talk about those in the series.
No, those are an attempt at a summary, high-level summary of what makes hop.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I think for me, hearing hop for the first time and seeing the principles, I was like, that's the boom. That's it.
Yeah, that's it.
That's what hop is.
I think a lot of people kind of feel that way, of that those 5 principles are inclusive of all of the thought process. And certainly they're an attempt at summarizing large chunks of the thought process, but I wouldn't say that they're all inclusive.
But
anyway, we mentioned...
I distracted us. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. We mentioned what the elements that go into human and organizational performance, at least from my seat of what I can see, is complexity science, organizational psychology, systems thinking, and a little bit of restorative justice. So we talked ad nauseum on complexity science, at least in its application to this space that we're talking about. And now we're going to attempt to do the same thing with organizational psychology, which before the start of recording, I confided in you, Matt, that I don't think I'm especially good at describing hop through this lens.
Oh, I thought you were done at the word describing. That's where you were going to... No? Okay. No, I agree. Yes, you did confide that in me before we started. And to extend your thought, because I think it's an important piece that you added, was because all of it is so influential on every piece, it's hard to maybe separate it out because it's so ingrained in sort of the total package of what hop is. So specifically,
if I could try to understand how they relate to each other, or articulate how they relate to each other, the elements or principles of hop are like the practical application, or at least the elements of practical theory of what organizational psychology is. It's like a bunch of us in the safety space were exposed to what an organizational psychologist would learn in school. And we're like, oh, we should do this. Like this is a thing that we should do more of. And then the results of us taking things like human factors and human performance and sort of manipulating it into having elements of organizational psychology embedded in it became what we now call hop. And an organizational psychologist would look at it and just be like, yeah, you're just kind of teaching elements of organizational psychology through a safety and leadership lens with the end result of trying to create resilient processes, but it's not different from organizational psychology. It's just framed and packaged differently, which is why I think I struggle so much to call out the pieces that are specific to organizational psychology.
I mean, you make a strong point for the first time in 77 episodes. That I mean, organizational psychology is. I mean, so much of it is theory.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, theory with a ton of experimentation, right?
Yeah.
But it doesn't necessarily always pair to practical day to day. How does this translate into what I physically do day to day?
Yeah. And that's what, I mean, we know from our experience as people are usually desperate for. Is like
Yes.
Okay. Yep. You're saying all these words. They sound good. Now what do I go and do?
Yeah. No, that's exactly what people ask for.
Usually in a list and usually in PDF.
Can it be? Yeah. Can
it be in a PDF and you can email it to me and I'll just do that.
Yeah. Let me follow these 7 things. And it's going to make me practically apply organizational psychology. All right. So if I had to call out the bits and pieces that feel most important, knowing that there's so much more that I can't articulate well. Let's go back to the example that we used in the complexity series. So we use the example of my morning to walk through learning in a couple different ways. One, picturing it as an ordered system, one, picturing it as a complex system, but just looking for things that I might call out as the end user as things that frustrated me or were difficult. And then one where I'm just talking about process. What is it actually like to do things in the morning to get out the door? And in having that conversation, the ability for you and I to even have that conversation, if we then took that conversation and put it into the structure of an organization, our ability to have that conversation is going to be dependent upon several different factors, most of which fall into this organizational psychology lens. The first factor, I don't know that there's an order to them, but one of the factors is the fact that you, as the person learning from me, have to believe there's a point in having this conversation. Meaning you have to acknowledge or believe that I have something to teach you that would be not able to be found anywhere else. Which is kind of the first sticking point in at least how I historically saw the world and then learned in this hop space of there is a procedure for my morning, theoretically in this analogy, somewhere, right? So there's a procedure that says something like, hey, you need to get the kids up and they need to have their big 5 with them when they walk out the door. And there might even be some specifics as to where those big 5 should be stored in the procedure. So then for you to want to learn more than what's written in that procedure, you have to first believe that I have more to offer about what it's actually like to execute the procedure or to execute the task associated with that procedure, because it might not look very much like the procedure at all in real life.
And
so
just
that's element number 1.
Adding in today.
I
That's all I want
want
to
to
add
say more
in,
about that because you're right. Yeah.
Is what it's like to execute that procedure today. Not 6 months ago, not 5 years ago. If I was a parent and I had done this stage of their life 5 years ago, I'd be like, no, I already know how to do the big 5. This is how you do it. Yeah. But today in your reality, it's different. So just learning about it with the desire to learn what it's like for this individual today.
Yeah. Which your desire to be curious about that is going to have to in part come from the entire concept of complexity, which we talked about before, the recognition that what's on paper is not most likely, if any time ever, exactly what's going to be executed in real life because of the amount of variability that people face in real life. It's going to look different than what's written on paper. And also the belief that the best way to get that information is directly from the people who are executing the task, not by sneakily observing people, not by camera footage, because it doesn't give you enough information about things like local rationale of like why I'm doing what I'm doing. It wouldn't be a complete enough picture to really understand what's happening without me being able to explain to you my thought process and why I'm doing what I'm doing and what good looks like and what a bad day looks like and everything in between. So that's element number one.
Very concise.
Element number two is whether or not me as the individual telling you feels as though you would be responsive to what I'm saying in a way that is not going to be a problem for me. So if I'm willing to tell you the details of what it takes to get a useful bag of 5 elements, which by the way, if you have no idea what we're talking about, you probably need to listen to the last episode as to what the big 5 is. But these 5 things that have to get into a bag, I'm telling you sort of the nitty gritty, ugly details of the fact that, yeah, and they're not sometimes placed in the place that we would expect it to be. And sometimes they are wet and I would miss the fact that they're wet if I didn't put my hand deeper into the bag. And, sometimes we do have a jacket left in a car. All of those elements in industrial environment or in the work world might be labeled as non-compliances. They might be labeled as non-conformances. They might be labeled as deviations or violations of procedure, which if that's the way that I think you're going to interpret what I'm saying, it would be very hard for me to actually tell you the reality. I would instead be just telling you what I think you want to hear. That's element number 2.
I was just thinking about there's probably somewhere, maybe a listener of this podcast that heard you go through your morning on the last episode and was like, wow, she's terrible. Like that's just, that's awful. I'm sure 99.9%. And we talk about this a lot, right?
No, or at least 50% have to have, they already knew I was
50%.
terrible though, Matt.
No.
This isn't new.
I can make fun of you. You cannot make fun of yourself. That's the rule number
sorry.
1 of this podcast.
Sorry. No, I know.
So, I mean, we talk about this a lot and it's probably going to come up very often is we say sort of, hey, if you're thinking about the average person, and we say to do that, kind of pull out the tail ends, the people who are going to be perfect at everything they do and the people who are going to fail at everything they do, which is an exaggeration that we use. But for some reason, it came to my mind when you were talking about that there probably was one person who heard that and was like, big 5 are done every day, same way, perfect every time.
Yeah, absolutely. Which if that's the dynamic, right, then that's one of these elements that makes it really hard to learn the useful information that we were talking about, the brittleness in the system, the things that work well. And so if we just take those 2 elements that we talked about and we give them different names, well, then, it could fall squarely into an organizational psychology lens. One name of you asking me questions and knowing that I have something to offer would be, curiosity-led leadership, which is, hey, the belief that there's expertise that falls outside of you and that as part of your job as a leader is to be able to gather really good information to make really good decisions based on it. And if we talked about my ability to talk to you openly about it, right, you could put that squarely into the psychological safety space of, hey, are you presenting yourself in a way that it's easy for me to tell you the truth? Are the conditions that are around me ones that would allow me to be candid? And when I do tell you something, what is your response to it? Does that response shut me down or does it allow me to tell you more of the reality? So just in that piece of it, we have this space of organizational psychology. And then what happens to that information, how we treat the information and what we do with it. Some of that exists in the organizational psychology lens and some of it moves ourselves into, systems thinking, but how we interpret the problem statements that come from what I told you about my morning, that suddenly falls into whether or not we are trying to define things as specific to individual psychology or specific to organizational psychology. And what as an organization we believe the appropriate level of problem definition is. Meaning, are we as an organization trying to solve things by attempting to make humans individually better at their job? Like individually, each person, we're going to manage their performance to the expectations and try to make sure that they follow those expectations 100% of the time. And that's the way that we're seeking to manage entirely. Like that's our only strategy. Or have we then taken sort of a wider lens and say, okay, of course we want people to execute a process as best they can. And of course we want to upskill people to be able to do that well. Like that's a given. But now also we want to define problems of understanding from a larger lens of what are the difficulties in terms of the system design piece of it? And is that even part of how we look at our process? Do we talk about how easy it is for things to fail or not fail? And what I mean by this is the design itself would fall into the systems thinking part of it, but the belief that that's something to focus on falls into the organizational psychology piece of it. How do we locally define our problems? And do we see process brittleness even as a problem to go look at?
You've seen me taking notes, which is probably odd. We've done a lot of podcasts together, and I don't think I've taken that many notes. And now I've been just writing for the past 5 minutes. Because
so I can see him as we're recording this,
Yeah.
as you can imagine, and he's not looking at me at all, by the way. He's just looking directly down, jotting down notes. I don't know what they say. I don't know if it's, just cartoons or
Well, yes, but also you said something that you actually, I don't know that you've said before that I can recall, which is as we think about the appropriate level of problem definition. And I think in general, we see that people want to get really sophisticated in how they define problems. And so when I think about it, one of the things that's been fairly common that we've heard even recently is that, well, we don't just stop at the level of the worker when we think about, problem definition. We want to move farther than that. And sometimes that farther than that is we want to look at the system. And sometimes that farther than that is we want to look at the supervisor.
Yeah.
And
it's a really good example of what I'm trying to say here. Yeah, that's a great example.
It's just that bifurcation moment of like, okay, if we're gonna go deeper, which way are we gonna go deeper? Deeper at the individual level and look at people who touch the tools and the people who are supervising the people who touch the tools and people who order the tools, or is it the systems that we're gonna go down? And it's a very important moment where, yes, people now with technology have the best understanding of work possible. Every day it gets a little bit better. And we can look at it and go in two directions, into that individual psychology and what's this person doing? Why are they doing it? How do we fix that person? Or we can look at the systems. And actually, you can do both, right? You can look at the individuals, understand their reality and their work without penalizing them for it, and also look at the systems they're operating in.
Yeah. So this bifurcation that you talked about is the example of a good example of how, as an organization or individuals within an organization, we are defining our problems and ultimately what we think our problems are. And there's multiple ways of seeing it. But there's two that tend to tug at each other. One is, hey, we're trying to move beyond blaming the worker. So it's not the last person who touched it. Right. So that's not our problem because the last person who touched it, they're just influenced by the person who set up the tooling or they set up the process, or they're trying to enforce the process, or they're trying to hold people accountable to the process. So the belief of what we need to go fix then is expanding to, we're not going to blame the worker, but we will blame the leadership team, because the leadership team should have known better and should have known this was happening and should have done something differently and shouldn't have set up the work this way. And it's their fault. And they're the ones that they need to do something better because they're the bad people. And it's sort of it's the same frame of reference. It's just zoomed out a bit.
It's these people need to be better reference.
Correct. These people need to be better. Yep. If the people were better, this would be better. Yes. If you had a better supervisor, it would be better. If you had a better plant manager, it would be better.
And you get reinforced that all the time because there are places where you feel like you have a better supervisor and you're not having that same negative outcome. Yeah. And then it just buys you to be like, great, then it is a person problem here. I need to treat it that way.
Yeah. Which, to your point, Matt, there isn't a time in which this isn't true, meaning you can have really poor leadership somewhere and things can go very badly because of the way somebody's leading or how they speak to people or how they respond to things. Like all of those things are absolutely true. But on a day-to-day operating scale, they are certainly not the only things we should look at. And I would argue the percentage of time we would label that as the problem is aggressively too high compared to what the actual problems are.
And if you're
So the
running into it more often than you should, I would look at the system which you're creating supervisors, but that's got to keep going.
like if you find you have really, really crummy supervisors everywhere, then maybe
look at the
the
training.
process of training our supervisors need to be looked at. So then the other way of looking deep, which we would say that this would fall into this hop space, right, is that we're not looking at it through an individual lens. You're looking at it through a systems lens or an organizational lens in which we are far more focused on help me understand what it takes to do this so that we can understand where the brittleness in the process is. So far more process focused, knowing that there's always going to be a variety and a variation of people and abilities that come through. Let's make sure that the processes, the way that we have to get work done is logical and makes sense to a large group of people.
Which
that lens, right? That whether or not that is even part of what an organization deems important to continuously review and understand, that becomes part of the puzzle piece of where organizational psychology fits into what HOP is. Like, do we even think we need to look at that? Or are we convinced that our processes are really well engineered from the beginning and that the general issue is that people just aren't following them?
Yeah. And there's 2 slides, but I'll combine them into one that we show in pretty much every training we've ever done that says if one person makes an error or mistake, it's highly likely that someone else given the same information, local rationale, would make the same decision and therefore the same mistake. I'm shortening. And so what we need to do as leaders is look at the system that's involved. So that's like where we try, we're kind of shepherding an entire audience to those slides as we go through with stories and with other detail that's, other context, other information. But that's kind of one of the couple anchor slides we have towards the end that is just such an important thought that goes directly into what we're talking about now.
Yeah. So if you had to try to like summarize or pigeonhole all of what we just talked about as this element 3 of what we do with the information or what we think is important to define into an organizational psychology lens, it would be exactly what you just said, Matt, of the recognition that people are influenced by context and we all have local rationale, meaning that if one person makes an error or mistake, probability is high that other people given the same environment and information would do the same. And there is a lot of shared environment and information within an organization. So understanding that that's true and it's not driven by an individual, it's driven by the environment and information individuals are presented with. And we're trying to make sense of that information in real time to create success. And that's why we're seeing what we're seeing. So we better understand the information, the environment, how the process is set up, what it actually takes to get a big 5 into a bag to bring to school. All of that becomes vitally important information to learn about because we can't define the problems without it.
Sorry. Big 5 is also, in my old world, was related to FANG. I'm not sure if you know what that is.
No.
What a way to end a podcast. It was the big 5 were Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, and Google.
Okay.
And their abbreviation was.
I understand. I get now, FANG. I pieced it together.
But the big quote unquote the big 5 was how they were talked about, and so
Did you just picture all of those being put into a bag?
Yeah, I was like,
I don't think they're gonna fit.
I was like, or is it a bag that just has those 5 logos on it? That's weird. That's a weird thing for a child to bring somewhere. Why would they do that? All right. So are we going to come back? Do we have more to say about this wonderful topic?
I think there's just one more element that we want to outline. So we outlined the dynamic between the two of us being able to have that conversation. And then we outlined from that conversation what we picked out as the problems, right? Are we focused on organizational concepts, or are we still like hyper fixated on, hey, I didn't do the thing that I was supposed to do, or, my spouse, in this case, my husband didn't do the things he was supposed to do, or the kids didn't do the things they were supposed to do to make this process work well. And then the fourth piece of this puzzle is how we decide what we're going to do next. Like, so we've talked to each other about the process. We've been able to define the problems that are independent of us as individuals. And now we have to do something with that information. We don't just leave it in limbo. How we do something with that information falls very squarely into this organizational psychology space as well. Meaning, is the way that we believe we should handle that information, is that a subsection of leaders goes and they develop a solution and then they tell everyone what they need to do? Do we set up cross-functional teams to interpret the information? Are the people who are actually executing the work the ones who are going to come up with ideas? Do they have to do that in a silo, or do they have other people that are going to be part of that solutioning together? Do we roll it out to an entire organization? Do we pilot things in small pieces of it? Who feels ultimate accountability and ownership to whether or not any of the ideas work? All of those pieces of how we then take a defined problem and try to solution it falls into this space as well. And depending upon how we do it, we're going to end up with very different cultures within the organization, right? You can have a very top-down culture in which there isn't a lot of ownership felt from the folks who are, lowest in the organizational structure because they're not given a lot of agency. Or you can have something closer to a high-performance team in which there's a lot of agency across the board. You still very much have defined roles and responsibilities, but within your role and responsibility, you have quite a bit of lateral agency to pilot things and try to get things done and make improvements. So that's the fourth element that feels as though we could talk about it squarely falling into this organizational psychology space. So I think next time we just take a bit of that puzzle and try to give some real examples around it, so it doesn't feel theoretical. It feels real.
Well, tune in next time. I want to do some like really cool ending, or I would do like some dramatic.
Watching you think about what I said.
Tune in next time. No. All right. So that's it for this one. We know we're on to for the next one. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk again soon.
Well, that's it.
Yep. Another one in the books. We did it.
If you want to send us any of your thoughts, actually fling us any of your thoughts, you can do so at the website hoppodcast.com.
That's hoppodcast.com.
It's still such a stupid name.
It's such a stupid name. We look forward to hearing from you. Thanks for listening.